It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is returning guest Jenna Greene. Welcome to the show, Jenna.
Thank you.
Well, you do have a new book coming out, and actually just came out. So, could you tell our listeners a little bit about that and a little bit about yourself to get us started? Because the show has grown a little since you were last year.
Sure. So the book that came out this week, it's called Reborn. It's a young adult fantasy, kind of that lower level of fantasy, similar to maybe Hunger Games, Divergent level of fantasy. It's the beginning of a brand new series. So if readers haven't read my works in the past or didn't like the high fantasy of some of the other works, then this might be a great book to get started on. A little bit about me. I am a middle school teacher in Taber, Alberta, and I live in Lethbridge, Alberta with my husband, Scott, and we have a toddler named Olivia, and the terrible twos are a real thing. She's a little bit bossy, or should I say she has leadership skills.
Both. I mean, I know that whole band bossy thing, but we're kind of past that, I think.
But she's smart and creative and has a vocabulary about someone 2 or 3 times her age. So I'm very, very proud of her.
Cool. Always good to get them started when they're learning lots of words when they're little. I mean, I know I appreciated that in my own life.
She'll be a writer someday. She's a storyteller.
Well, cool. So you say this new book is kind of in the vein of, Hunger Games Divergent. Is it more dystopian sometimes, or is it that kind of genre as well?
Yes, I would classify it as dystopian, and I wrote it as a dystopian. Lots of people do know that term, but there are some people that don't. So I tend to classify it as a fantasy as well, just for those that don't know about that terminology, because dystopians really just kind of come about in the last 10 to 15 years. I love dystopian works, and so I was really happy to create one of my own.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I mean, young adult dystopian, definitely. But I mean, there are some of the classic, 20th century dystopian work as well.
1984, Brave New World. Absolutely.
Indeed. Yeah. Lots of that stuff. And arguably some of the works of Ursula K. Le Guin as well.
In terms of YA, though, it's really become, maybe not created, but really become popular.
Yeah.
In the last decade or so.
Yes, for sure. I'm not to split hairs. I'm just like, I don't want to shove some of my favorite books under the rug there.
That's right.
So so as far as your story, is it what's the premise of Reborn?
So it starts with it centers around a 16-year-old girl named Lexel. And she has 7 memory marks on her face. Now, normally those would appear when she was fairly young, but she's what's known as a late bloomer, and so they don't appear till she's 16. So she's led a very regular life, a bit of a tragic one. Her parents died and she had to take care of her infant brother. But a normal life in that she wasn't a reborn, someone with the 7 marks on her skin that state that she has lived previous lives. Because those marks appear, she is sold into slavery to those that have only lived once. So we start the novel with her being sold and her having to go to a plantation and work and have a totally new life and a new identity where she has no power, no rights, and her only value is the work she can do. So it's quite an abrupt transformation in her life.
Well, yeah, it's obviously very dark, as befits a fantasy dystopia as well. I mean, the situations, that the characters get thrown into in this kind of book, it sounds like it fits right in, and that's not good for your characters, obviously.
There's definitely a few situations that are fairly scary, and then there's a few scenarios that are quite disturbing. When she's sold with a very young girl, maybe 5, maybe 6, who's being sold into slavery as well. And so Lexel is a very nurturing character, partly natural, partly because she raised her younger brother. But she becomes very protective towards this little girl named Sierra, as they're both taken into this new life. And one of the major changes in the book that leads her to maybe not be so accepting of this new life is in protection of this little girl and protecting her for something that is pretty horrific. And so there's a big character shift due to something that's a little bit rough to handle. And so she has to step up and step in to prevent that.
So no spoilers, but yeah, that's
No spoilers.
Definitely a book that doesn't shy away. It goes dark places at the very least.
It does go dark places.
For a young adult, especially.
Yeah. But I can't tell you what.
Yeah, we're not going to go into the specifics. However, it does seem like a lot of these, especially the dystopian YA, it does go a lot of dark places. I mean, when I was a kid, I was raised on things like, The Hobbit, which is not really YA at all. I mean, the main character's an adult, but also things like Ender's Game, which kind of is the proto version of this kind of story, really. At least in my mind.
No, I was raised on Babysitter's Club, so nobody dies there. They just get babysat.
Well, that's a good start, though. I mean, I was just thinking about the books I read growing up, and I was like, yeah, I guess Harry Potter was coming out when I was little, so I was in grade school.
I was in university when Harry Potter came out.
Wow. Okay, so yeah, again, we don't have to establish a timeline here. So as to how is the difference between the guest and the host. But as far as I was just thinking that Harry Potter is the one where it's like that established, at least to begin with, is a much lighter tone than the books that some of the books that came after, like the Hunger Games and Divergent and all that. I guess what I'm trying to get at here is, do you think there's a reason that the books have gotten darker? I mean, because it does seem like also in traditional secondary world fantasy, we have kind of the rise of what people call grimdark. I just like to think of it as dark fantasy. Things like Joe Abercrombie, really, really dark stories with grim kind of worlds. I think it seems like that. Yeah, go on.
I think we've just kind of stepped that way, and if you take one step in, then the next writer can take another step in, and so the boundaries kind of get stretched a little bit slowly. Kids are exposed to more nowadays with social media, with worldwide news. They're aware of things more in the world. When I was growing up, reading the Babysitter's Club, being very unaware of anything past my little block of, neighborhood. And so I can't help but think back to my children's literature class when we studied Harry Potter and that fairy tales and early literature was to help people prepare for the world. And so showing really dark things, evil stepmothers doing all sorts of things, but to show that people could overcome. And that was the message of original tales and stories, that horrible things could happen, but that characters can survive. And so that's why we love Hunger Games, Divergent, things like that, I think.
Oh no, that's a really good answer. I think, and also it really does ring true to me when you trace it back to, say, Grimm's fairy tales or other things like that as well, where you have these are stories that inform the reader how to survive fantastic situations, but they're situations that are in some ways real, especially in their time period.
The situation may or may not be real, but the themes always are.
Yeah, that's kind of different.
The theme of loss, the theme of change. The main character, Lexel, it's really about identity. And can she change who she is? Someone calls her docile. And then she really starts to wonder, is she docile? Is she kind of that accepting person that just does what they're told? And then whether she can change that. And she has to wonder, is that something in her character that's stuck there? Or is it something about herself that she can work towards fixing? And so themes like that are universal. Can you change who you are
Oh,
and become a
absolutely.
better
Yeah.
person?
And those are that's a very powerful theme. I mean, I mentioned Joe Abercrombie earlier, and that's not a spoiler to say that that's a major theme of my favorite works by him, the First Law trilogy as well. Uh, yeah, so that's just kind of what's on my mind lately. Actually, is the change of characters, especially point of view characters in a story. You know, it can be it's very interesting. It's very difficult for me to know if I'm doing it right when I write my own work. You know, doing it in a way that makes sense to the reader, but also is a big enough change in a way, you know, or a big
Right.
enough shift. Is there a way you gauge that for yourself?
Um, oh gosh. I try. I think it helps that I work with young adults.
Mm.
Um, and I teach I work in a middle school, there's grade 6, 7, 8, and I work with the sixes, but I can see them throughout the school, how they change in grade 7, 8. And then we're really close to the high school. So I see these kids for, a good 5, 6 years of their lives as they slowly change and transform. And I think maybe not consciously, but maybe subconsciously, that helps me think about characters and how change can be gradual, but when there's an event, it forces drastic change. So when you look at a character in a novel, I think if they were just going about their daily life, they wouldn't change a whole lot, but they're thrust into situations that require them to change rapidly or drastically.
Yeah, I see what you mean, and especially the teenagers who are kind of, or the kids and the teenagers who are more, kind of they're more malleable in a way. They can change more in some ways than adults can,
I
or more
always
quickly. Yeah.
I always talk to parents at parent teacher interviews, and they're like, "Oh, my child is getting rude, and they're questioning things, and they're always in my face." And I'm like, yes, it's annoying, but developmentally, that's what they're supposed to be doing. That is right where they're supposed to be. Hopefully they do it respectfully, but you got to break away from your parents and you've got to form your own ideas. And so that's why this is why I write it and this is why I love it. But young adult literature parallels that, of all these characters out on their own or thrust into situations or testing out ideas. And it's just, I find it personally the best genre to write, the best age group.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And even though the books I'm publishing right now are mostly, they're adult space opera, but they include these very YA style flashbacks. I've written one YA book. But less said about that, the better, probably in my case. But but I actually have written more than one, but I published one. But the in this recent series, in my Pillar Universe series, I do these flashbacks to when the main character was a teenager, or about that age,
Oh, clever.
And because I really wanted to show some of the things that formed who she is in the front story. And there's some specific events that happen there too that really do kind of reverberate through the course of the entire series. So anyway, I just think that's kind of that kind of thing. I mean, that's the closest I've come to writing YA lately. So I'm trying to find a touchstone, As far as that goes, do you you say you're really passionate about YA? It's clear, but would you ever write any other genre, or is this your main interest?
This is kind of where I started. I mean, when I started writing, I never said, okay, I'm going to be a YA writer. I was 17 and I wrote a book where the character was 16 and I went from there. And then I had another idea and the characters were 10 and 15. And then I had another idea and the character was 16. But I'm just starting to branch into other areas. I don't have time to write it because I have so many other projects, but I have an idea for a middle grade series. Maybe delve into picture books. and just starting to write maybe for the adults, but kind of starting with short stories. I feel is the safest way to kind of venture into that area.
Oh yeah, testing the water of the short stories is pretty good idea, I think. And they can be they can be a great way to get more noticed, in the areas you publish them, because they're just more, especially if you're getting into a magazine or some such. But you know about that. I'm just talking. Yeah, just talking.
Well, it was the first short story I wrote, because I'm not really good at short stories. I have too much to say and I had trouble condensing it. But I signed up for an anthology, and then the deadline was kind of looming, and I was like, I have to do this. I said I would, so I have to, even if it makes me somewhat uncomfortable, even if it's something that I'm not as confident with. I have to finish it, and I did, and I was actually quite happy with the result and proud of myself. So I guess you got to put yourself into scary situations sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of it's funny. It's kind of the meat of writing, the challenge, honestly, of writing and publishing, I should say, because even with me, I mean, I'm publishing independently. And when I release a book, and lately I've been like, yeah, I need to reach out to more people so I can get more eyes on my work, more influencers and things like that, people like that. And if I don't, then the books just kind of flounder and they disappear, But if I go on other people's podcasts, if I talk to the right folks in the right places, I can get a lot more eyes on my work, and it's very useful. But it's also kind of scary. I mean, I find it a little bit. I mean, some people may think it's odd that I go out on this podcast every week, but it's my show. I'm in charge here, so it's a little easier. And the thing is, it also doesn't reach nearly as many people as some of these other podcasts I really need to start entertaining.
I met Stuart McLean
Mm.
once, a very famous Canadian author, and he said, put yourself in a position where you have to write. Even if you have to set deadlines for yourself, but put yourself in a position where you have to write, because it's way easier to avoid writing.
Mm-hmm.
Writing is fun and it's beautiful, it's magical, but also it is hard at times.
Yeah.
And I personally, writing's not too bad. It's editing, and I'd rather hit my head against the wall. But I took his advice to heart, and I would say, okay, you have to write maybe this many days a week or this many hours, or finish this project by then, or sign up for an anthology, and then follow through on it. And I think that his words have helped me a lot.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's good advice, and I think when I get engaged in actually writing rough draft, it's kind of my challenge right now. Is that I sometimes think I am too intense about my process. I'm too focused on it, and I'm not focused enough on the story I'm telling. It's a real issue that I have because I'm a very technical minded person when it comes to writing. In some ways, I'm not as intuitive. I don't think as much. And I used to be very immersed in my stories, and I need to get back there, and I'm working on that. But do you get how do you feel like you immerse yourself in your stories and your worlds, or do you approach it a different way?
Oh yeah, because people always ask if I plan things out in detail, and I have a plan, but the plan never stays the same because my characters take me on all sorts of journeys that I wasn't expecting. I'm like, oh, you're gonna do that? Okay, I guess that changes my plan. Or in the moment, I'll have an idea. I have a notepad by my bed because I'll have notes and then I'll change them in the night, and then I have to figure out what I read. But that part I'm really good at. Once I start writing, it goes fairly smoothly. But I mean, I work out of town. I'm a teacher, so there's all sorts of extracurricular marking, all sorts of
Mm-hmm.
planning to do. Then I have to take care of my daughter. So when it is time to write, I only have about half an hour to an hour at night, and it would be a lot easier to just watch TV or read a book or just go to sleep. And so I have to really push myself to sit down and write, even though, because once I start writing, I'm fine. I've got the
Mm-hmm.
energy, but motivating myself to start when I'm tired and I have other things to do. So I have to really work to make it a priority.
Yeah. Do you find that it gets easier as you as you do it, as you know, forcing is the wrong word, but as you find ways to make yourself start, does it get easier?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Um, as soon as I open my computer and I reread the last few sentences of what I write, it's go time and I'm good. Um, Starting maybe a new novel from the first, page one, that's a little rough, but once I sit and do it, it's easy, it's fine. It's just I'd sometimes I'd rather be lazy.
Oh, of course. I mean, I think that happens to all of us. Though, it's interesting because you say the beginning can be rough. I find that actually, for me at least, I mean, obviously everyone's different, and I think this is definitely one of the places we differ because I feel like when I've started a book, it's like, oh, there's so much promise, it's so easy, like I just run through it. Partially because I have all these ideas circling in my head to begin with, right? When I start a new story, it's not really like I just started it in a lot of cases.
I think
Oh, go on. Sorry.
oh, sorry. I think I plan with kind of the end in mind,
Hmm.
or I start writing with the end in mind, and so having to figure out how to get there. It's always that first chapter that just although with this book with Reborn, the whole thing flowed. It was
Mm.
magical. It was unexpected. I feel it's one of the best things I've ever written. It was also the easiest thing I've ever written. Maybe not to edit, but it it just came and it was almost like a muse took over, and there weren't a whole lot of struggles. It was amazing, and it's I've had moments like that before, but I've never had a whole book that went like that before.
Oh yeah, no, I actually had one book that did that for me back it was 10 years ago or so. I wrote this book that is now three books. I split it into three parts, but it's the first three books to my Spells of the Curtain series. It's currently out there. They all it's just kind of I mean that's a story I tell a lot is where I wrote the first 10,000 words of that book in one day. So I wrote about, whatever, 40 pages in one day, and
Wow.
it was such an incredible feeling. I just took a Saturday and I'm like, I'm doing this. I was an undergrad at the time. Uh and but then I took like a month off of the book because I was like, I'm back to school. And then but then as soon as summer came, I just knocked the rest of the book out, and it just flowed so easily. It was kind of amazing. Just like you're describing I mean, in a lot of ways, what you're describing with Reborn. And I gotta say, I just wish it was bottleable. It's such a great feeling.
I know. Well, and the summer goes better because as a teacher, I have summers off, and then I have far more time to dedicate. And so the more hours I'm writing in a day, the kind of the easier it goes and the momentum builds. And so I've written a lot of good books in the summer, but Reborn I wrote during the year. Um,
Mm.
and I mean, and there was even a break in the middle. I wrote half of it while my mom was ill with
Mm.
cancer, um, and I didn't write a whole lot of it right at the end. And then I picked it up again a month or so after she died and finished it off very quickly. So that the idea that it flowed but had a necessary break and then flowed again is um, astounding.
It sounds, and it sounds the way it probably felt for you. It's almost miraculous, right? I mean, that's kind of the best writing feels for me anyway, as well.
And when I went and I think I left it for a while, and then when I did the editing, um, I found so many parallels with it to what was going on in my life. I mean, obviously, she has the character has memory marks, and there's this myth that she has lived before, and has a connection to the past. And then in the book, it's people start to wonder, well, is it a myth? Is it just something people use to enslave people, or is there some truth to it? And then, Lexel kind of explores that idea through the book. And then, years later, looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, like thoughts about people passing and then returning and I'm like, makes sense now. My mom was dying, and but at the time, no, I didn't see it.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's isn't that always it always seems to go that way, is where I mean, just to bring up the Spells of the Curtain book again. I mean, this was mine was I mean, that was the first time in my life, I think, when I was feeling I felt very confident. I finally had friends in my freshman year of college. And I felt much, and so I was very much a much lighter story than I'd told in the past, where every other story was kind of dark and bloody, even the young adult ones. And I mean, and I know obviously your book's young adult too, and it sounds like there's some darkness there, as we talked about before. But my point is, when I wrote the Court Mage, the first book, I was kind of just overwhelmed with the possibility. Okay, life could be better. It could be good, because I had a really hard time as a teenager, and that's a weird, and I don't know, that's kind, it's interesting, but there was definitely a parallel there. I don't need to go into it exactly, but that book has got such a positive spin, especially for an action adventure fantasy story. It's this very open feeling world, and there's all these things to do. It's just this beautiful place, and I think that's one of the reasons. It just paralleled my life, and maybe that's one of the reasons Reborn flowed so well for you too. I mean, the parallel
Writing
could be
is
very
so complex and so complicated, and it comes from our heart, it comes from our brain, it comes from our soul, and it's amazing. It's art. It's amazing where it all comes from.
Oh yeah, you can say that again. Yeah. So as far as your creative process, then it sounds like actually no. You said this is the first in a series, so you don't have to spoil anything. But do you have plans for the next books, possible titles, that kind of thing?
I have a title and about, let's check, I think about 10,000 words. The sequel's 13,000 words. Go me.
Oh yeah.
So the second one will be Renew, and the last one, if I ever get there, because I'm still working on the second one. So Reborn's the first, Renew is the second, and Restore will be the third.
Ooh, good series titles. Yes,
Yeah.
I like it. Yeah,
I'm very proud of myself on
you
that.
got the whole re thing going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, so we're about out of time. So Jenna, can you tell people where to find your work and what to do with everything?
Absolutely. So it is on Amazon.com and .ca. Just look up Jenna Greene, Green with an E on the end, and you'll find all my books. You can also go to Foundation Books and that's the publisher, and find it there. You can find my other books at champagnebooks.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at jgreenwrites. My website is jennagreen.ca, or I'm most active on Facebook, but you can catch me on Instagram. So you can find my books lots of places, and you can catch me lots of places.
Wonderful. It's been great having you on the show. So as for this Alive After Reading podcast, you can find us at mentalcellularpublications.com. You can find my books, including Spells of the Curtain series, the Stormfleet and Flamewind, which are Flamewind's coming soon. Stormfleet, which is the first book of the Pillar Universe series, is out right now, and it could use some nice reviews on the Amazon.com page, because it's got some nice ones in the UK, and I've noticed people in the UK seem to trust their reviews. So it's working, and reviews give authors wings. It's true. So yeah, if you have read that book and wherever you're reading it, leave a nice review, and if you liked it. And yeah, thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
That tears it.